When I was born in the mid-2000s, technology and the internet were growing to the level we're at now. Social media, YouTube, and especially graphics. Ooh, we look at the cool realistic models! The days of artistic constraint were slowly loosening, and that meant a lot of things. No more limitations on models, no limits on the colors we can use, infinite potential is what many would classify it as. At least from what I've gathered since I was like 2 years old when all this cool stuff was happening. During the 2010s to 2020s, aka the era that I grew up in, there was a very big shift in how things were presented. Things were becoming more sleek, more modernized, simpler colors, simpler designs, and in my opinion, a distinct lack of identity. I don't necessarily mean that in a negative way. Every era has their own identity, and whether it be good or bad, once you see it, you'll instantly recognize what time it came from. Since I grew up in a transitional period, I often had a fondness for the less standardized style of art because I literally bear witness to everything becoming the same. Being frank, even at my young age, I noticed that everything was starting to look more bland / samey. My dad was a huge tech person and essentially used the internet at every stage, so he introduced me to older aspects of it, including websites and video games. You know, back then I could criticize it and be like, where are the graphics? Why is the sound quality so bad? Why is everything so pixelated? Why aren't things aligned and why does it look like someone just mishmashed stuff together? But at a much older age, I can actually appreciate the effort that went into stuff like this. Growing up on YouTube also helped, as I was introduced to many channels that helped bring focus onto these aspects and how impressive they really were. There were tons of constraints, such as limited color palettes, bandwidth, my dad stressed that a lot. You couldn't put nearly as much power as you could into websites and programs for that matter today, so you had to think outside the box in terms of what you wanted to create. What this did, however, in my opinion, was create a style that was both heavily unique to the individual, but synonymous with the technology used. You can look at a bunch of old websites and games during this time, and you'll see how unique they all are, but you can tell they all come from the same core structure, if that makes sense. Like how most browsers use Chromium as a base. Things weren't standardized or powerful enough just yet, and that left room for many to express their visions, with some unable to flesh theirs out, leaving it to seem out of reality. Let me make an analogy really quickly. The way I see it, creating stuff with modern technology is like using a piece of paper. Now you can use any piece of paper, a white piece of paper, a brown piece of paper, a green piece of paper, even construction paper. But back then, you only had the white piece of paper, and you had to fit your entire vision within that piece of paper. I'm speaking out of my ass for this part, so if anyone who was alive during this time could help, I'd appreciate it. Now, how does this topic come into play? Well, like I said earlier, these types of styles are very different from each other, but they're cut from the same cloth. So if you were to get a mishmash of all of it, it would be different, but not enough that you'd be like, wait, what is that doing there? I did not grow up in the 90s or early 2000s. I have no nostalgia or memories of this. All I have are memories of other individuals and the history that's present in all of it. And it's with that perspective that I state that To ENA Dream BBQ is a masterful art piece that celebrates not only the era of the 90s to early 2000s aesthetic, but also abstract art as a whole, either intentionally or unintentionally. It takes full advantage of the style it's replicating, not only as a reference, but as a way to strengthen the core of the game. I know I'm not the best person to talk about this topic, but I do have a lot of respect and admiration for this era of technology. And hey man, I love talking about things I love. And keep in mind, this is gonna be a biased video. If I see something that's incredibly 90s-like, I'm probably just gonna say, oh, that reminds you of this old 90s game, and not, it was Tuesday of October 1993. I was in the computer room at my school just itching to play more of that old 90s game. I wasn't supposed to, but we were cut off early when some students got into a fight, and being on the computer was my only source of happiness at school. Then right when I was about to start the game, my technology teacher opened the door and saw me. But instead of scolding me, she instead just said 10 more minutes and closed the door. That moment always stuck with me, and this scene in ENA reminded me of that. Or something like that, I don't know. For those out of the loop, ENA, both the character and the series for that matter, started out as a series of videos created by Joel G. Simply put, the videos involve ENA as she tries to accomplish some sort of task, while having to deal with the many residents of the world that she's in. I strongly recommend watching the series if you can. They're not long, and it's best you do so to understand aspects I talk about later on in the video. One of ENA's most defining qualities is its visual style, and the intro of the video was created for you to immediately see the similarities. The grainy look, the pixelated look on 3D models, and the intentional or maybe unintentional liminal spaces. These all radiate that era of the early internet and technology. But what ENA does best is use it to create a world in which traces of our reality is implemented, but not in spots we'd think. We have languages that we recognize, but apparently everyone is bilingual, or at least understands what the others are saying without the others speaking the same language. Like some Chewbacca shit. We have rooms that look like they be in a home, but they're a bit bigger than it should really be. It's intriguing, and gives ENA a unique identity throughout its runtime. Some would consider it nostalgic, while some would consider it out of our world, which is also very accurate. In 2021, a new entry in the ENA series would be announced, simply called Dream BBQ, and it was originally just going to be another video. However, plans for Dream BBQ became so ambitious that it was announced that this adventure of ENA was going to be a full interactive game. While a release date wasn't confirmed, people and myself included thought it would release in like 2022 or 2023. But after a few delays, it finally released earlier this year. Those delays were awful, by the way. I understood why it was done, as it gotten so ambitious that it's now split into chapters, but as a fan of the ENA series, it was unfortunate seeing it get pushed back more and more. Everything I've stated regarding ENA's vision visual style is put into full effect here, and this time on a much grander scale. Aesthetics in the videos that match the early 90s? Well, guess what? Now the aesthetics are part of the game itself, and it turns it into an extra level of immersion. It isn't just an art piece you can look at, you can actually experience it. When I talk about ENA's aesthetic, I can't just talk about how it looks now. I now have to talk about how it plays, how it feels, because almost every aspect is reminiscent of that era. From the moment you step into the game, its visual style is immediately present. I literally took a few minutes just to admire what the fuck was going on. There's a giant dude that swims across the world, the textures and buildings are low poly, and as you continue on throughout the game, these types of outer world elements pop up more and more while still staying in its own form of reality. Look at all these different areas. They have different color palettes, different effects, different art styles, yet you can tell it's the same game. The world of ENA is diverse, managing to mishmash so many styles without any being out of place. You have 2D characters, 3D characters, and this really high quality model. My initial thoughts before researching was that the style of ENA was based on the early 90s to early 2000s webcore 5th, 4th generation of games aesthetics and other terms I cannot accurately describe. If you're familiar with the terms I described, you can see where some of the inspiration comes from in the visuals. There are some characters and environments that are deliberate references, such as the CDI wizard that I got a good laugh of because I love the CDI games. A big side effect of the limited technology they had back then was that a lot of things were left up in the air, creating visuals that weren't fully fleshed out, but enough for you to get your mind thinking. Rooms like these are both eerie, but allow for so much imagination, and ENA perfectly encapsulates that. It even replicates how old games looped music and sound effects, creating both an authentic feel of that era, but also using it for its own purpose in terms of ambience. You can look around the world and see the most bizarre things, floating buildings, giant creatures inside buildings. It is trippy and unknown, but has just enough traces for your mind to connect reality to it. I guess that's why it's called abstract art. Going off any personal connections I have, I was reminded of Star Fox and Katamari Damacy while playing. Star Fox wasn't a pioneer in early 3D models per se, but I'll always remember its distinct polygon-esque identity. I'll always remember when you go for a wormhole and end up in a psychedelic world where you battle a slot machine and have a bird fly around. There's no reason for these elements to exist, but the fact there's no reason makes you think of a reason, and that element is kept intact in the world of ENA. And I don't need to explain Katamari Damacy, just look at it. Later parts of the game, such as the maze and the hallways, ooze the old 90s era of games, including how creepy it can get. Now, back then, it was unintentional, but I feel the game takes it in a different approach. Look at this clip, and you'll feel the same dread I felt recording this. This game will take you on an adventure with locations and set pieces that will feel familiar, but what the fuck is that? You could take a screenshot at any point, and it'd probably become a banger post on Twitter with people doing a full analysis on it. What you may say about the visuals may be entirely different from what I say. I think it's freaky and bizarre and weird and cool, and someone else could probably say how each element represents how ENA is viewed in this world or something. Recall back to when I talked about how I grew up in a transitional period in the 2010s. The same happened in the late 90s to early 2000s as technology progressed. 3D models were beginning to be utilized on a much grander scale, but like I said earlier in the video, wasn't standardized, so everything was unique. It's like it was a everyone for themselves type of scenario, and it created the results that we see in that era. What I love most about how ENA uses these elements is that these visuals aren't just for cool reference / Easter egg, no, they're used to enhance the story and world building. The lore of ENA is not one I particularly want to talk about because nothing is exactly solid. Is ENA a species, some with just different bodies / versions of themselves? It's not clear, but so is everything else in this universe, bringing up questions. Questions that may or may not have an answer for the ones willing to look deep into it. The original version of ENA, or at least her design, was based off this painting. And combining that with the many other references ENA uses for its visuals, you begin to have the ability to grasp what ENA is showcasing. If I was 5 and I had no reference for what to associate these visuals with, I think I might genuinely go insane, or at least have it be present in my mind for at least a decade. It's part of the reason that outsider art has always intrigued me, because large aspects of their art aren't based on anything. Since they create visuals that have almost no references to reality or society, it shows in their work. You'll have difficulty connecting what you know in order to understand the art piece. And if I was born just a few years later or didn't grow up on the internet, I wouldn't describe the world of ENA as abstract or heavily based in the 90s to early 2000s. I'd probably say horrifying. There has always been a natural fear of the unknown, a fear of not understanding something. Science has allowed us to bridge that gap, giving a mostly logical explanation that can help us sleep at night. Why does darkness exist? Lack of light. These kinds of explanations help us visualize and begin to have a deeper understanding of these topics. Why does this old 90s game have an empty hallway that's incredibly off-putting? Well, because technology was limited, and having a simple hallway like this was actually really impressive. Now with that knowledge in mind, that off-putting feeling kinda gets eased as you understand why it was made that way. But what if you didn't have an explanation? What if you weren't given a reason for why this exists, or why music stopped playing here for some reason? Then it's gonna be scary as fuck. Rooms that disappear once you exit it, music that you can't explain, taxis that can transport you to an entirely different location, and a randomly looking like a sketch. What the fuck is going on? If I wasn't familiar with 90s games or games at all, hearing the sounds of people talking and then suddenly stopping before doing it again would freak me out. Why did they stop? Did they whisper something in that time span? Was it about me? What'd I do? That uneasy feeling spreads throughout the entire game, and it's only because of my brain recognizing what's referencing that I didn't stop playing after this moment. And like I stated earlier, even if you don't have a reference for this world, the game does a good job at establishing it. Things are taken at face value, and certain elements do have some explanation. Anna losing her color and being a sketch is a funny moment as it goes by so fast, but to someone who doesn't have any reference for sketches and drawing, they could interpret it as a different version of Anna, or how it could be one of the many bodies she has inside of her. It's why I love the world of Anna so much. I touched on this sort of topic in my JoJo video, but I love when series do references that aren't just used as references, but as something that enhances the story or gameplay. When I finished my first route, which was that purge event thing where I had to deposit an arm and go for a crazy party and style location that's in the original Anna video series, I felt so bewildered. I jumped through so many locations that had their own unique puzzles and environments that I could just barely place where the reference came from, but not enough that I could appreciate for what it was exactly referencing. But I didn't need to know. The game did a fine enough job explaining what needed to be said and left it in my own head for the in-lore reason for why it exists. Why did the houses disappear in the most bizarre ways? I have no idea. Maybe Anna just radiates a natural disaster aura around her and that's what causes it, I don't know. Maybe it's her past as a supposed war machine doing it. Maybe the houses are actually scared of Anna and doing this of their own accord. Some of the ways the houses disappear remind me of how certain effects worked in old games, but bad news, I don't have full memories of that type of stuff, so I'm speaking out of my ass. In fact, speaking out of my ass has been most of this video. I can say I've done all the research I could, researching the unique traits of the 90s era, but the fact is, I didn't grow up on this. I could be one of those TikTok kids to be like, ugh, I wish I grew up in this time, I miss when we had style, and yeah, shit, there definitely was style back then, but in terms of technology, fuck man, I'm happy to have a fast-running PC with almost no limitations. And I like the fact that Anna has the same sentiment. It could have easily replicated both how old 90s games felt and controlled, like having tank controls, but thank God it didn't, or else this video would be titled entirely different. If you watch the video series, you can see how it replicates a sort of tanky / linear movement, and on a surface level, it's really cool how faithful it feels, but when you translate that to an actual game, you really gotta ask yourself if you want to translate everything from the 90s, including the shitty ass controls. I guess the only thing I haven't gone too in depth is the music and sound effects. Unfortunately, I'm not too knowledgeable on the era of these sound effects, but you can definitely tell there's a level of compression within all the voices. No matter what language you hear, the sound quality isn't gonna be pitch perfect quality, and that's on purpose. It's done to both simulate the late 90s feel and to add more depth into this world. Even the voices that do sound high quality, like the wizard or shaman, has this funny ass echo effect that made me laugh the entire time he was talking. And the echo effect is still present even after the building blows up, where the supposed echo is supposed to be echoing off.
Now, it's your turn to go to the bathroom.
The world of Anna is one that's bursting with life, so much so that it requires you to have one in order to fully grasp it. I mean, I'm basing this video off my experiences of life and connecting it to Anna, so what does Anna bring out of you? What if you don't have any attachment to these aspects? What if you do? How does it feel for you? I'm literally just a noodle, so if you have any interesting thoughts to share, feel free to share it. Here, there, anywhere, down there below. And that's my cue out of here. Salutations, and farewell. Also, shouts to Cody. He was gonna be in this video, but he couldn't make it. He's like, cool. I miss him.